Hi guys, happy October. I hope you had a wonderful September and that you are possibly looking forward to some ink drawings this month as much as I am. But as for today's video, I'm going to be taking you through the painting process of this recent piece, based on a beautiful old fairy tale you might have heard of called The Six Swans. At the start of the month, I read this book, The Daughter of the Forest, which is the first book in the Seven Waters series by Juliet Marillier. I was recommended this series a lot on Instagram. I've read quite a few of Juliet Marillier's other books and I love her writing, so this seemed right up my alley and I really enjoyed it, and this is what initially inspired me to paint this picture, because the first book in the series is a retelling of The Six Swans. If you haven't read Daughter of the Forest and you don't want to be spoiled at all for any of the plot, maybe don't watch this video, or at least don't listen to it, because I will be talking about the old grim fairy tale, which has a lot of similarities since The Daughter of the Forest is a retelling. So my painting is pretty much based on the old fairy tale, although a lot of inspiration, as I've said, did come from the book. And I suppose there are a couple of nods to The Daughter of the Forest in my painting, like the colour of the girl's hair and the forest around her, which I tried to make feel very Irish and old. Now, in the old story, it is the six princes of this kingdom who are turned into swans by their evil stepmother, and the young princess evades this curse, but is determined to save her brothers, and she finds out from them that the only way to break their curse is to make a shirt for each of them from asters, which are flowers like this, and to not speak a single word until the shirts are complete and the curse is broken. So the princess makes up her mind and sets off to do this, and it takes 6 years to finish all the shirts, in which many other things happen, but that's kind of the scene that I chose to capture, is like the period of time where she's making these shirts. The story doesn't really talk about how she makes the shirts. The brothers tell her that she has to make them from asters by sewing them together, but as someone who spins and makes clothes and sews, you kind of know that with working with any plant fiber, you have to like dry it and break it up and then get it into like a fluffy state and then spin it before you can work with it. So that's what the Daughter of the Forest kind of delves into, is like how she makes it, and it kind of expands on that. So I decided to go with that and have a scene where she's spinning by the lake where her brothers are. And just before I started to paint, I had the idea to turn these leaves in the foreground right at the edge of the lake into aster plants, so I gave them little purple flowers along the stems so that they look a bit more like the plant she is spinning with. Now, an interesting thing I thought is that over the years I've seen quite a few different variations of a very similar story to this, and artworks sometimes with 10 brothers who are swans and sometimes 6, and it can change quite a bit. And then I looked up The Wild Swans, which is a story published by Hans Christian Andersen in 1838, and it's very similar, and I certainly believe that Juliet Marillier was inspired by both The Six Swans and The Wild Swans, and maybe some other variations of this story, because The Wild Swans is a little different in that she has to spin nettles and like hurt her hands over a long time to complete the garments, which is more akin to what happens in the novel by Juliet Marillier. The Six Swans was written by the Grimm brothers in 1812, so that was before The Wild Swans by Hans Christian Andersen. But I've been doing a little bit of research, and it seems that there are quite a few other European fairy tales with the very same concept, which is the maiden who seeks her brothers, such as the 7 ravens, the 12 wild ducks, Judy and her 7 brothers, the wild swans, the 12 brothers. So I haven't looked too much into it, but it seems that as many fairy tales, they can be changed over time and rewritten, and elements of the story tweaked. I suppose one can take inspiration from many different artists and stories over time, just as I have with this novel and the old story, and putting my own ideas into it also. I spent quite a long time on this painting. It was certainly a bigger undertaking than some of my other artworks, and there were a few times during the painting process where I just looked at the paper and didn't really know what to do next. Was just kind of looking around thinking, how am I gonna do those trees, or how am I gonna add depth in this area? Last year and this year I have tackled backgrounds a lot more than I ever really have before, and it's been quite challenging, and I've had to push myself like with this painting, but I'm pretty happy with the results, and with every painting I know that I'll improve my backgrounds, and it's just a lovely thought to me that the more I paint things like this with backgrounds and out of my comfort zone and put more complicated elements in my art, my future concepts and ambitious artworks won't seem quite as daunting. For the past few months I've been in quite a book slump, like unmotivated to read anything, but I knew, like always, I just needed a really good book to get me back into it. And that was Daughter of the Forest for me. Let me tell you, this book had pretty much everything that I look for in a fantasy, and I loved it. And I think you would also love it if you, like me, enjoy Irish fairy folklore and world building and sort of a plot that is very nature centric. Also, if you like to read from a female's point of view who is a very wonderful, strong character, but doesn't necessarily have to pick up a sword and fight to prove that, but their strengths lie in their gentleness and femininity and their softness. They're healers, very in touch with the forest and nature and the circle of life. I'm currently reading the second book in the series, Son of the Shadows, and I'm about halfway through, and I'm absolutely loving it. I just have a feeling this is going to be a series of books I'll reread over and over again and love for a long time. I spent around about a week working on this painting, and the whole time I was painting I was listening to this audiobook, Vow of Thieves, which is the sequel to Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. And I think it's just so cool that when you listen to a story, whether or not it's the same illustration work you're painting, that story sort of becomes infused in the painting, at least for me. So like now when I look around at the trees and the swans and the lily pads, I'm remembering parts of the story I was listening to while I was painting that area. And it's like the painting and the story are now sort of fused together. At the moment I've got a credit for an audiobook, and I'm trying to think of what book I should listen to, because now we're in October and I'm going to be working on some ink illustrations, so I'm trying to think of a book that's long enough to listen to for a bunch of drawings, and also has the right kind of inky, darker vibes, but still magical, foresty. If you have any recommendations, do let me know. I have quite a few books on my list, but often I'll go on and they're only 10 or 11 hours, and the ones I just read were 15, 16, so I feel like I'm not getting enough for my money. I want maximum length of listening time. I used a lot of masking fluid in this painting. For obvious reasons, I masked off the swans and the lily pads because the backgrounds around them were going to be darker and they were going to be quite pale, and I didn't want to have to go around them so carefully when I put in larger washes. But I also put a lot of masking fluid on the leaves in the foreground and up in the trees, which did take a long time, but I was pretty certain that it was what I needed to do at the time. I don't know how true that was now. I think maybe I could have just painted them green like everything else and then gone around them with my darker shadows, but it turned out fine, so I'm not unhappy about that.
We all have fantasies. Even Jason and I have them. Fantasies we've had.
Now, I really tried to use the composition of this painting to separate the elements and put a lot of focus on my main characters. So The princess in the middle has the most contrast on her with the dark hair and the pale skin. The swans are all pale and then the background is all dark with a lighter area of the background around her to sort of create a bit of a halo effect and separate her from the background. As well as the trees going tall and straight, I thought made the forest look larger, and all the little dark shadows they put in between the trees to really push the forest back. I did spend a long time slowly going about it and making decisions to emphasize certain areas and I guess strengthen my composition, and I think it turned out rather well. I do find myself looking mostly at the princess and then the swans and in the background, but they all play off each other, I think.
Sparks showering. I threw the torch to the ground, then laid Cassie near the door. I grabbed a rock from the cave floor and banged on the wall, forgetting the code.
Probably the most challenging part of the painting was the water, because I'd made my mind up that there were going to be reflections of the swans and the girl on the tree, but I wanted to do it in quite an abstract way, not a perfect reflection, but just hints of what was there. And I also wanted the water to be quite dark so that the lily pads would stand out. So I did find that mixture between dark and light a bit challenging with the lily pads and the water, and just trying to capture the reflections or the hints of the reflections in a realistic way so that it didn't look silly. And I think it looks okay in the end, but it was certainly challenging, and I think I need to think it through more next time. And here's the finished painting and my little painting setup on the floor. I sat cross-legged to paint basically this whole thing and loved it because all my art supplies were very close at hand and I could spread out as much as I wanted. Thanks very much for being here and coming along while I paint this beautiful fairy tale scene. If you want a print of this, you can click the link down below to my Etsy shop, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your week.